delighted to have today my friend Tricia Sanders, who is the founder of High Five Consulting, which is based in St. Louis, and I'm delighted that she's here with us. So tell the audience briefly about High Five.
Sure, absolutely. Delighted to be here with you as well, Ned. So High Five Strategies is a strategy and executive coaching and management practice that partners with companies, nonprofits, to really build out a rock solid, focused, disciplined strategy, and then roll into execution. Because what I've found throughout my career is that execution is where most organizations falter, and it happens to be something that I love. One of the things
and I was going to say, you're very good at it. You're very good at it. So when I first met you, it was when you were putting together really a roadmap to execute on a strategy that had been developed by a regional bank, and you were an integral part of it. And what impressed me at the time was the fact that you were able to get people aligned. You were able to take the strategy, align the individuals, sort of mesh people together and make it happen. And that's a really important skill, as you point out. I'm curious, I know a little bit about your background, and we're doing this right before Veterans Day. So I know that you did spend a number of years in the military. Was that where you developed your philosophy around how to execute?
I think that's where I found a home in people who have a bias for execution like myself. But my kind of planning and roadmap and all of that has just been a part of how I operate in everything I do ever since I was a kid. Like, I think I probably drove everybody crazy. But when I got to the Army, I spent 7 years active duty as an Army officer and found this structure that was actually much less rigid than people think. But if you brought a plan and the ability to execute that plan, they would support you in almost anything. And so it was an incredible training ground for me to be able to have an idea and to be able to, at the age of 23, take it and build a global program or something like that most of my, at least age-wise peers weren't having that experience. And what the Army really taught me about execution and planning is that it actually doesn't really matter what the output is or what the deliverable is. It's all about people and understanding how people work together, how people consume and adapt to change was absolutely my number one takeaway from my time in the military, and something that continues to inform how I work and serve in my practice on a daily basis.
So one of the things that you and I've talked about, and you've done work with a number of my clients over the years, the idea of getting people pointed in the right direction would seem to me to be one of the things that you figured out. And one of the analogies that I think you used in one of our conversations was about a formation, an Air Force formation. Can you elaborate a little bit on why design is important in that sense?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it all starts with design of your strategy, right? And so when you come into an organization, a lot of times the arrows in terms of priorities and activities and people are pointing in hundreds of different directions. And a well-executed approach to strategic planning is going to get those arrows mostly pointing in the right direction. And so then once you have your foundation of a strong strategy, which to me means that an organization knows where it's going, why it's going there, how it's going to get there, and how it's going to measure success. So once you have most of those arrows pointing in the same direction, then you need to look at your organization. And that's a little bit of kind of like boxes and lines in terms of an org chart. And that formation analogy that I love is that your strategic plan is your mission at hand, right? And so if you think of, or not in the Air Force, but if you think of an Air Force formation of, let's say, fighter jets going out to accomplish a mission. they set their formation to accomplish the mission at hand based on the environment in which they exist, right? They're not thinking about, well, I want to build a formation for 5 years from now. Like, no, we know what our mission is, also known as your strategic plan at these organizations, right? So we know what our plan is. We know what we want to achieve. Now let's build ourselves or set ourselves in a formation to best accomplish the goal within the environment in which we find ourselves.
So one of the things that you did coach me on, and this is something that as I think about strategy and why it sometimes falls apart in the execution and why so many change initiatives really founder, is the idea that it's hard to do lots of things at once. So when you think about a mission, you've taught me that you have to be really focused on whatever the big thing is and not get distracted by maybe these other shiny objects. So for example, if somebody, a CEO in a bank says, we've got all these operational issues and we've got digital and we've got to diversify our commercial lending portfolio, we've got to grow. You would say.
Yeah. I would say pick one. And really, most oftentimes what I find, particularly at banks, is we want to grow revenue and we want to increase our operational efficiency. Well, don't we all? But when we think about look at our organization right now and really assess what we need to take it to the next level, and that also requires us defining what the next level means for us. And then one of those things is going to take priority. And this is where oftentimes in my conversations with chief executives is where I get the initial pushback, like, well, no, Tricia, we need both of those things. We need to grow and we need operational efficiency. And what almost always happens is when we talk about the growth that organization needs, they recognize that they need to start with operational efficiency because they haven't been focused and disciplined in building that strong foundation. And so if they want to grow and scale efficiently and well and elegantly and not have, be taking a bunch of Tums every day, then they need to singularly focus on getting their house in order so that they can then roll in, whether that's acquisitions or other elements, product development, other things to give them that growth that they seek and can achieve once they get their house in order. If you try to do them both at once, you're essentially spreading an organization way too thin and nobody's happy then because you're doing nothing well. So
let me try to put myself in the position of a CEO who's got a board that wants to do everything and wants to do everything now. Yeah. What does the CEO then have to message? Because he can't, even if he acknowledges that the issue is we've got to build the infrastructure, he still has to deliver messages about growth. What does the CEO have to do in your estimation during this period?
Yeah, and so that kind of gets back to that roadmap that you'd mentioned earlier, Ned. So it comes to making us look a little bit further out to identify that growth. And so with one particular bank that I worked with, they wanted to grow 10x in 10 years. And so they're about $1.5 billion. And so they wanted to be $15 billion in 10 years. And so there's obviously going to be some acquisitions in there, but it's not going to happen overnight. And so you look at kind of, year 0 to year 10, and you chunk it out. And so we say, okay, for the next 3 years, we're going to be locked in discipline on getting our operational processes, systems, and people in place so that in chunk 2, so let's say, years 3 to 6, we focus a little bit more on organic growth, product development, maybe some small regional acquisitions. And then in that third chunk, that's when you're ready to kind of really go all out and take on some potentially larger acquisitions that will get you to that $15 billion mark that particular organization was looking to do. And so it's about being able to show an intentional and purposeful roadmap. Purposeful progress is something that my clients hear me talk about a lot. and so it's understanding where we want to go with the acknowledgement that we're not going to get there overnight. So if we really look at it intentionally, like what makes the most sense for our organization, to chunk it out and get there.
So I recall in one of the projects that I watched you had a very elaborate roadmap, and there were a lot of different projects. And as I recall, they did have different timelines and they sort of overlapped in some cases. What's involved in building that initial roadmap?
So you have to know the organization well. And the particular roadmap you're speaking about, and I will joke that this is common with banks, I think, across the board, potentially. Everybody likes to joke how slow the government is. And I say, well, you've never met a bank.
Now, remember, you're dissing the people who are listening to this, but I think they would all acknowledge that you're right.
I mean, I have said and will continue to say that to my bank friends, and they acknowledge it. But what I learned kind of the hard way after a year or so of banging my head against what felt like a very hard brick wall was that I needed to take it a step closer to the ground level and chunk it out into even smaller bits. I call them kind of like the motherhood and apple pie bits. So in that particular, there were a number of priorities, but one was just to build a really robust sales culture and sales discipline that didn't currently exist. And so we knew there were like 30 things that were missing. But if you tell people, all right, we're going to do 30 things, they'll just shut down and stop listening. But if you say, okay, for the next 4 weeks, we're going to talk about what sales meetings could look like, and we're going to have sales meetings. Everybody is like, oh, okay, yeah, that sounds good. Yeah, that makes sense. We're a sales organization. We should have sales meetings. And so you get a small group together and you knock out sales meetings. And then the next thing is, we should really think about how we, so it's that timeline is kind of what you're thinking about, right? So we've got our sales meetings, and then we've got our, how do we handle our tiering of our prospects so that we're spending the right time with the right people. And so we do a small project with a small team to talk about prospect tiering. And then we knock that out, and then we move on. And so it's about really chunking out kind of what could be really, and oftentimes you see as kind of big strategic initiatives that just never get done because nobody takes the time to break it down into consumable and achievable kind of more tasks or smaller bite-sized micro projects, I call them sometimes, that an organization can actually do, know? And so then 6 months in, you're able to show an organization like, look, I know you think that because for the last 20 years, the bank hasn't been able to finish a single project. You guys just finished 6. And they feel good about that. And they see it, right? Because they see the new dashboards that they have in their monthly sales meetings. They see the tiering in their customer relationship management system. They see the support that's coming now from marketing now that we're more focused in who we're going after and how we're going after them. And so they can see real tangible results in a short period of time. And then 12 months later, they kind of look back and it's like, oh, wow, we have a sales culture.
Well, and what's brilliant about that, and I recall watching how you sort of integrated various people into these micro projects. And I've got to believe, you can correct me if I'm wrong, this is actually a very, very smart way, not only to get buy-in and really develop what organizationally is going to work, it's also a way to up the skill set of people who do need to learn how to work together, who do need help in project management. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. I would absolutely agree with that, Ned. So kind of one of the core guiding principles of my strategy practice is that strategy execution is one of the best mechanisms for senior leadership training and coaching. Because you put those leaders in charge of projects, strategic initiatives, activities, whatever you want to call them. And then I come alongside and work with them and coach them and help them see how they can actually take this, seemingly scary or nebulous one-line activity into a plan that they can actually achieve. You know, my favorite thing to hear after just a 1-hour conversation with a leader is, oh, when I came onto this call, I had no idea what I was going to do. And now we've got it. Like, I totally understand what we're doing and how we're going to do it. And I see that it can get done. And you can just almost see the relief on that leader's face and in their posture, because they have a plan. And so helping them and coaching them to build that plan for a practical, real world activity that's going to make their organization better is a win-win.
That's great advice. I love the way you're approaching it. If I could give you a high five right now, I would do that. But Tricia, thank you very much for spending the time with us. I do strongly recommend bankers to think about the execution piece, because I think, as Tricia indicated, you can have the best strategy in the world, but if you don't execute it, you're really not going to get anywhere. And again, I've learned a lot watching you, Tricia, and I thank you for sharing your wisdom with the group today.
Oh, thank you, Ned. My pleasure.